All right, this is a redo of a presentation that I made in Gdansk, Poland at the European Federation of Therapeutic Communities conference in September of 2024. The title of it is Naya Arbiter, the Philosophy and Ethics of a Visionary Therapeutic Community Leader. So we all know in this field George DeLeon, who's been doing research, training, and writing for the last 4 or 5 decades about therapeutic communities and has traveled all over the world to therapeutic communities. What George had to say about Naya was more than anyone else in the last 2 decades, Naya has made the greatest contribution to the evolution of the therapeutic community. And he added to that, Naya's impact has been manifest in multiple roles: clinician, teacher, trainer, public speaker, and social activist. Her focus has been on those suffering from addiction, mental illness, and trauma, particularly among the socially marginalized, the incarcerated, the disaffiliated. Her influence, direct and indirect, has been transformational, life-changing. Naya and I have been partners, colleagues, in arms for some 40 years, working to advance the therapeutic community approach. For me, her loss is irreplaceable. For all in the field, it is immeasurable. So those are pretty high marks. Who was Naya? A little background. She was born in New York City, not wealthy. Mom and dad were pretty poor. Her mother was pretty well educated, came from a good family. The father had been in the Navy and was, I think, a psychopath who sexually molested Naya from about age 2 to 6 and tortured her and terrified her in many different ways. So she had kind of a rough start in life. Her mother then married a professor from Columbia University who was very, very highly regarded around the world, really, as a professor of mining. And she was exposed to a lot of culture and a lot of people from around the world who came to visit him. And she also, as a result of that, lived for a while in Bolivia and in Mexico, learned Spanish and spoke it fluently. She moved to Tucson when she was about 16 years old and went through a very dramatic adolescent rebellion. She got involved in smuggling drugs, using drugs, got addicted to heroin, was involved with a gang of mostly Mexican nationals, but some ne'er-do-wells from the United States as well, smuggling drugs over the border. She was arrested 3 times in Mexico, incarcerated in Mexico twice, once for 5 or 6 months, which was a pretty horrific experience, which speaks to her character that she survived that experience. She was then arrested by the FBI when she was almost at her 18th birthday and incarcerated in the Pima County Jail. And she was going to be sent for 10 years to a federal prison as an adult, even though she was still a minor. Fortunately, very fortunately for this story and for Naya, she had a probation officer who was very sympathetic and risked her job, got her minority extended, and took her to Synanon, which was the very first therapeutic community in the United States in Santa Monica. That was a life-changing experience for her. She had a very profound personal transformation. First, of course, going from a heroin addict, a rebellious teenage heroin addict, to she was always a model in Synanon. She never got into trouble. She was very, very highly regarded. Chuck Dieterich, who was the founder of Synanon, identified her very early as being a very unusual person. As a result of that, she got a lot of different assignments in Synanon. She worked as a secretary to the executive assistant to the president. She worked doing master's level work, even though she only had a high school degree, on 2 National Institute of Mental Health grants for about 5 or 6 years. And she did a lot of other things. She did the Synanon archives, and she also worked a lot with newer people, new residents. She also made a very profound decision when she was just 23. She loved kids. Kids loved her. She decided to be childless for the rest of her life. She made the decision that she was going to devote her life to taking care of people who had not had, who were kids or adults, who were pretty much abandoned. And that was a very profound decision, which carried her through really the rest of her life. The third thing about Synanon that was very important was Synanon crashed and burned in a very, very spectacular fashion, which has been very, very well documented, especially recently in a couple of television documentaries. And I think for Naya, that was a very profound experience as well. You know, how did this organization, which started with praise from around the country by psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and government officials, for being the first to really do something about heroin addiction, end up characterized as a violent cult. And I think for Naya, that was what to do, what to take from that experience, and what definitely to leave behind. So when we look at Naya and some of her fundamental ethics, one of them was, and she repeated it often for staff training, and she demonstrated it. Never ask anybody to do anything that you either haven't done or wouldn't do. And it was funny, I was listening to Anthony Fauci, you know, the director of the Department of Infectious Diseases, and got a lot of, had a very interesting time during the COVID crisis. But he talked about, they were trying to do something about Ebola, and they had 2 patients, and Ebola, of course, was highly contagious. If you touched anybody who had, any part of their body or got any bodily fluids on you, there was a 50% chance of death. So they were trying in his clinic to figure out, with these 2 patients they had, some way of ameliorating Ebola. And Fauci, who was the head of the entire institute, suited up and went in working shifts with his employees, with his colleagues. And they said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "Because I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do and am not doing." And it really reminded me so much of Naya, because that was really the way she approached her work all of her life. The other part was really the power of personal demonstration. If you want to gain credibility, either with your faculty or with your students, the fact that you are actually suited up and doing the work makes a really big difference. And the other thing, of course, was community as method, which is how George DeLeon characterizes therapeutic communities. But basically, she really believed that community itself was healing. So some of the essentials that we're going to go through, uh, gender equality, her belief in sanctuary, the importance of physical environment, turning the therapeutic community into a teaching community, the importance of circles and ceremonies, her insistence on inclusion, that everyone could enter the community. Her tremendous interest in outcomes, whether what we were doing actually worked and whether we could improve it. And also kind of the resolving or balancing the needs of the community and the corporation. So let's start with misogyny versus gender equality. While Synanon was pretty progressive in a lot of ways, it was also very misogynistic and patriarchal. The story of Synanon was always the story of Chuck Diederich, even though there were a lot of very, very strong women who really made that community work. Great story, when Abraham Maslow came to Synanon, he spent about a week and was very, very positive about Synanon. And as he left last day, he said he was talking to Chuck Diederich and his wife Betty Diederich and some other folks, and he said, I've never met anybody a living person who really met my criteria for a self-actualized person. All the people I've identified that way have been dead. And he said, but I've finally met somebody here. And everybody thought I was going to say, and that's you, Chuck. And he turned to Betty Diederich, who was a African-American former prostitute and drug addict, and said, and that's you, Betty. So there were some really fantastic women, but they were really pushed down in Synanon in lots of ways. And Naya was determined, after she left Synanon in 1980, and came to Tucson and started Amity, she was really determined to build a therapeutic community where women had real equality. The very first paper published in a academic scientific journal about Amity, the first thing was that the biggest problem in therapeutic communities is that they work great if people stay long enough, but they had a very, very high dropout rate. So what Naya was able to show in this scientific paper was that at Amity, where there really was gender equality, the length of stay for everyone went up. So when you treated women well, everybody got better, including the men. And that was a very dramatic first finding. Now, I really believe women were more oriented toward relationships and less toward hierarchy. They were often much more emotionally available and emotionally open. And they had a really powerful and unique role to play in community. And she made sure that they had an opportunity to do that and called them the culture carriers. You're seeing now a picture of women and children, because it was really important for Naya to include children, to include women with their kids. In the earliest days, she had the board of directors told her there was a woman who wanted to come in with a child. She didn't, and she committed suicide. And Naya said, either I'm able to take women with children, or you need to find another director. And so there were always, kids. At Amity, it's a picture of Naya with some faculty and students, women students, talking about sanctuary, which was very, very important to her. She really believed that personal transformation can only occur in an environment where people feel safe, accepted, and are really inspired by other people who are going through the change process or demonstrating the change process. So she noticed and we noticed together that a lot of the therapeutic communities that we visited had really got hung up on structure and overdoing it on structure and sanctions and punishment. Kind of bought into the you got to break them down before you build them up. The groups were often really, really harsh and not safe for kind of personal disclosure that's really important for people to feel safe enough to change. And so Naya made a lot of modifications to some of the basic TC practices while retaining the essence of them. The physical environment was a signature for Naya. You know, she really believed it was the very first therapeutic intervention. How people feel when they came into an environment before anybody said a word. The environment speaks non-verbally but very loudly in terms of, are you respected? Are you accepted? Is there a representation of your culture? Does it feel like a jail or a hospital, or does it feel like a home? And that really became a signature for Naya. You see some pictures here, and you notice everything is in circles. I put this picture in, it's an outdoor picture at one of our campuses, and put in the Navajo Prayer, which is a very beautiful prayer. I'll just read a couple lines of it. Beauty in front of me, beauty behind me, beauty above me, beauty below me, beauty all around me, I walk in beauty. And she believed that the environment should be a calm, peaceful, emotionally safe, and beautiful environment for all of our students. Teaching. Naya really changed the language and the thrust of therapeutic communities by saying it's not a therapeutic community, which can be kind of therapy, can be kind of shifted over into a medical approach. It's a teaching and therapeutic community with the emphasis on teaching and learning. So then the employees became faculty, and the residents became students, which was very dignified. Instead of being, we're here to kind of, therapy you, do something to you. You're here to learn. You're here to learn a new way of life. You're here to learn how to change your life. This is the process of personal transformation. And you're learning how to make really good, healthy relationships and good choices in your life. And you're also learning a lot about the really big things in the world out there, because she really believed that our students may have done a lot of crazy things, but they weren't dumb. They were smart and they were interested. Here's a picture of us with Al Gore at one of his climate change seminars with several of our faculty and students. That was just an example of the kind of exposure that she gave to our students throughout. Here's a picture of Naya teaching. And here's the Amity approach to our curriculum. And she used the metaphor of the medicine wheel because we started here in Arizona, although we're largely in California these days. And the medicine wheel became a great metaphor, a great way to organize our own curriculum. So we have restorative paradigms, origins and family dynamics, so important, moral development, and emotional intelligence. This is a picture of these books. Naya wrote specific curricula for the therapeutic community, and we really don't know of many others or any others that were written specifically for a therapeutic community population that used all of the therapeutic community essential elements and was designed for people who learned in many different ways, verbally, non-verbally. It included the use of many videos and exercises, and of course groups and ceremonies. So in the mid '80s, we'd been doing some work with incarcerated people who were not incarcerated, who had been released, and then we started working in a local jail. Actually, the jail where Naya had been incarcerated here in Pima County, which made her very happy. And so I used to ask her what she wanted for her birthday, and she said, "For my birthday this year, I'd like a prison." I think I gulped, but I said, "Okay." And this is a picture of Naya teaching in that first prison we got, the R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility right outside of San Diego. And you can see we had about 200 guys. They were medium security, which meant that the group of guys we had, yes, they had drug problems, but well over 50% of them had committed crimes of violence and had done quite a bit of time incarcerated, both as juveniles and adults. In other words, it was a pretty tough population. There was a lot of skepticism. People did not think that this was going to work. Our colleagues in therapeutic communities thought we were crazy. They eventually became our competitors as time went on. And that very first project was very, very important because we really proved that we dropped recidivism of these offenders who were considered to be the ones the Rand study had said years earlier, lock them up and throw the key away, they can't change. And they're violent and dangerous. And we showed a drop of recidivism almost 50% for those that participated both in our in-prison and post-prison facility. Here's a picture of Naya working with women in a prison in California. Those are all lifers. Many of them were released, and many of them came to us later on. Circles and ceremonies. Well, ceremonies, what do ceremonies do, really? What's the purpose? They bind people together. Disparate people who don't look like each other, racially, ethnically, experientially, educationally. And by doing ceremonies thoughtfully and skillfully, we bind people together and they become a community. And that's what we do in therapeutic communities. Naya was an expert at this. So these ceremonies provide meaning, connection. The fundamental ceremony, of course, is the encounter group or the circle. And that's such an important thing. Circles are for everybody in the community, the faculty and the students. We can't have a community approach. The whole TC approach is community as method. And we can't have a community if the faculty are not part of the community. So they are really the first circle of community. And so they need to participate in all these ceremonies and in circles, regular faculty circles. Naya had done, as I mentioned earlier, master's level work on an NIMH project while she was in Synanon. And she brought that interest in and skills in terms of research to Amity. A lot of TCs at that time were not interested in research, but Naya led Amity in that direction, and we had an enormous amount, a number of research grants from the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and other research grants. She interacted with researchers, asked great questions, which a lot of times they were like, we didn't think of that, because she was so close to the populations that we were working with, and had a very inquiring mind. So she really wanted to know whether what we were doing, whether it was working, and whether we can improve it. Some of the research we did research, a lot of research on women and children, women, single women, women who were pregnant, women who were postpartum with very young children, and women with older children. And those were all published as a result of Amity's work. Senator DeConcini put about $100 million into federal funding for programs for women and children across the country, and many programs were inspired by Amity's work in that area. Work in prisons and jails. Obviously, at one point, we started with one prison, and I think today we're in 23 prisons in California. Violent offenders, we were able to show that using the TC approach, the Amity TC approach, that violent offenders did as well as low-level offenders in terms of reducing their recidivism, which meant we reduced violence, which was unprecedented. Research on our educational approaches, the retreats that we were doing, that Naya headed up, which were week-long, very intensive, a massive dose approach. One of the first grants in the United States on HIV/AIDS, and we really showed that we could change needle-using behavior. And of course, work on adolescents. And a lot of this was published, of course. And here's a picture of Naya, George DeLeon, and Kevin McEnany at one of the first national conferences on therapeutic communities. And because she really believed in dissemination. If you do the research and you find out something, you need to disseminate it so other people can benefit from it. Both the things that went well and the things that didn't go well, and the things that you learned. She traveled all over the United States. She was in 23 states talking to their Department of Corrections about how to set up therapeutic communities. She made many presentations and consultations on working with women. Here's a picture of Naya at the White House Conference for a Drug-Free America, and the letter that was written to her personally by Ronald Reagan, the president at the time. She was the youngest person of the 125 national experts that were picked for that auspicious conference. Inclusion. Now, I was always asking, who are we not serving? You know, obviously, women were, even today, are excluded to a great extent from therapeutic communities. And she really wanted to change that and demonstrate how well women could do. And that when we treat a woman, we very frequently are breaking the cycle of addiction and poverty and dysfunction, because they are the caregivers for those children. And of course, women who have grown up in dysfunctional families don't know how to be mothers. They don't. You learn how to be a mother from your mother. You don't learn it from a book. And so if you had a dysfunctional mother, it's quite likely that you will be a dysfunctional mother. And so to break that cycle giving women an opportunity to change their lives and learn how to be good mothers in the TC is so important. I mentioned violent offenders. I mentioned in terms of including adolescents. We did adolescents for quite a few years. Hispanics, Native Americans, another population here. Our main facility at that time was here in Arizona, where they were surrounded by Native American tribes. Native Americans generally did not have the opportunities of the dominant population to get into a really good, intense therapeutic community program and have those opportunities. And of course, I mentioned HIV/AIDS and the LGBTQ plus population. Interestingly enough, when AIDS was really hitting this country very, very hard, we began taking in people who were HIV positive and some people who had full-blown AIDS. And at Therapeutic Communities of America, there was a vote to vote us out of the organization because there was such hysteria and so many people believed we should not be treating that population. Wiser heads or cooler heads prevailed, and we remained in the organization and kept taking people who had AIDS because they were our people. Community and corporation, as TCs get larger, and some of them now are really massive, with providing many different kinds of services, not just therapeutic communities. The needs of the corporation start or can start to subsume the needs of the community itself. And I always made the point that we need strong and effective corporations, but the purpose of the corporation is to support the community, not the other way around. And as Amity grew and has become quite large these days, she was a continual advocate for making sure that the needs of the community were placed first and foremost. So in this picture, you're seeing Rowdy Yates and Naya, who actually passed within a month of each other in 2022. But Rowdy is giving Naya the very prestigious EFTC award for the person who's done the most for therapeutic communities in the past couple of years. This was in 2013. And Naya and Rowdy were really, really close friends. So Naya, she made hundreds of presentations and consultations throughout the United States and internationally, of many publications and articles and book chapters, dramatic and continual involvement in research on improving therapeutic communities. And she was really an inspirational leader for 50 years. But one of the best measures of leadership, of how effective you are as a leader, is how many leaders you produce. And this is a picture, probably about 30 people in here. These are the people who are running Amity today, and they were all mentored by Naya. I'm going to read something she wrote about the therapeutic community. The therapeutic community needs to be an Ellis Island for the immigration of emotional states. When individuals who enter travel from degradation to dignity, destructive behaviors to constructive ones, despair to joy, prejudice to inclusion, manipulation to forthrightness, inconsistency to steadfastness, repression to expression, denial to acknowledgement, cruelty to friendship, then the particular healing that only humans in community can offer each other is miraculously at work. So here you see a picture of a plaque that's in one of our centers, memorializing Naya. And on it says, "Do you believe in spring?" That became a metaphor that became a signature for Naya. She believed that no person, no matter who they were, where they came from, what they had done, what they looked like, or should be excluded from getting a chance to change their life for a personal transformation. No matter how bitter the winter, she believed a spring was possible for every person, and every person should have that opportunity. So I want to close by reading something, a message which I think we can say is a message for everyone who's seeing this video and for everyone that she cared about. May you know joy, the joy of a kept promise, the joy that comes with the freedom of truth, the joy of enthusiasm, the God within, the joy of making peace, the joy of bearing witness as spring returns to a devastated heart, the joy of knowing you have a home in the heart of a friend, the joy of completing the journey over your River Jordan. May you know joy. May it find you and stay with you. May joy's laughter heal you. May joy's passion shine in your eyes. May joy's music pass through your lips and keep you singing and dancing along the way. Thank you.
Naya's charismatic presence, her remarkable knowledge, expertise, and kindness left a deep and lasting impact on me. Naya's presentation at the EFTC conference in 2017 in Dublin was the absolute highlight of the conference program and inspired me and my colleagues in Coal Mine to drive forward with services for women and families impacted by problematic substance abuse.
Naya was a shining star in our field, a gifted clinician and teacher. Her work strengthened residential treatment of drug abuse in America.
Siri, what is the meaning of the name Naya? In Arabic, the name means good. In India, the name means new, fresh, renewal. In Aborigine, mother. In Africa, in the Xhosa language, it means true to God or loved by God. In the Native American Shoshone language, it means my beloved or beloved daughter of God. This is what Siri gave me when I asked the meaning of the name Naya. I was not surprised by the spiritual and nurturing descriptions of this name. They painted a picture of an extraordinary person that I was honored to call a friend and be viewed by her as a colleague and fellow wounded healer during these many decades. Naya will be sorely missed by all who knew her. The countless souls that she touched in her wise and gentle way, from her peers in Synanon to her family of Amity and the men of the prison programs and community-based facilities that she helped develop. Her international accomplishments are far too many to mention. All who were privileged to have known her understand the meaning of the name Naya.
Nayas impact has been significant, and she will be dearly missed by the therapeutic communities across the world. Naya's life work has been to construct chances for those in seemingly impossible situations. Naya's power came from her ability to use her life experience and her deep professional knowledge to connect with anyone she came in contact with, people in addiction, colleagues, politicians, policymakers. A fierce advocate of individual rights and the power of recovery, Naya never missed an opportunity to teach, and we all learned much from her. We will miss her smile, her generosity, her creativity, and her wisdom. Rest well, sister.
Naya opened the door to a completely unknown world for me, a young woman in her 20s, in the Japanese television industry in 1995. I was preparing to make a documentary on Alice Miller for a Japanese public TV channel and was looking for some activities that used her methodology, looking into childhood abuse and breaking the cycle of abuse. We filmed a week-long retreat at Circle Tree Ranch in Tucson, which Naya organized and led. It was a mind-blowing and life-changing experience for me. Naya was very humble, without ego, fully inclusive, and always learning and challenging. She gave me a lot of assignments, so I'm going to keep in shape for myself.